good morning, good evening, good afternoon, good whatever time you all are in. This is a bit of a philosophical talk combined with technical bits and design bits. And I want to start out by just talking about creativity at large. And a few years ago, in like the lush landscapes of Zambia, a chimpanzee named Julie captured the attention of researchers as she started wearing a piece of grass hanging out of her ear. And um, this had no utility at all. And creativity is often defined as in academia as the ability to have novel ideas of value. And even if this didn't have any like utilitarian value, it was clear that it was like a fashion trend that she was starting. And just similar to Janice now wearing his octo kitten, it has value because we think it's nice, right? So this caught on, this act of self-expression and creativity. And Julie herself was observed jibbing around 168 times, whereas an early adopter jibbed around 38 times during this period. And soon, at least 2/3 of the entire group were observed jibbing. And even after Julie sadly passed away, the chimpanzees in the group continued to jib, honoring her influence as a fashionista. And this is just one of many examples of creativity and even cultural transmission appearing in nature. I think we're used to thinking of it as something that's mostly sort of unique to us as people and human. And we maybe think of like creative geniuses like Claude Monet or Beyonce or Miyazaki or Yayoi Kusama when we think of someone who's creative. But it's found in nature at large within many groups, even if the acts may be small. And more recently, the canvas has broadened and made the jump from nature to silicon-based machines. And we're seeing now clearly every week something new pop up where if a few months ago it had been done by a human, like here, taking two photos originally generated by Midjourney and then filling them in Photoshop, this act of drawing these pixels would clearly have been creative if a human did it, but we might resist sort of to label it as creativity when a machine does it. And just yesterday, Framer released their Framer AI tool, which is incredibly close to what a lot of people do in our daily jobs. And we might also then sort of not want to label it creativity. But I think rather than changing the definition of creativity, we should accept that it is creative because the definition that's almost always used applies or sort of works to label AI as creative. And often when we measure creativity, either in recruiting contexts or when we measure it in academia, a divergent thinking task is often used. Like you might have done this if you get a brick and you're supposed to list as many use cases as possible for this brick. And this is a proxy then to creative ability. And AI is great at divergent thinking tasks like this. And if it doesn't perform well, it's probably because you're not prompting it right with a tech where it's at right now. And it's getting incredibly close to our sort of main creative ceremony that we perform at jobs, which is sitting in circles, doing often the same thing. We have a different context. We're solving a specific problems, but we have diverged ideas and we write them down on Post-its with really weak adhesives and try to put them up. And it's clear, I think, that we're entering and have entered into a new era of AI where it's gone from mostly an informational tool that we have deployed for many years. For example, Amazon, common use case that used this for recommendations, right? If we're buying something, you would be recommended something else, which makes sense from past buying patterns from others who are maybe similar to you. And likewise, Netflix has used it to personalize their recommendations, but mostly keeping at it as an informational tool where nothing new really is generated, right? But it has gone from that to a creative tool the past few months. And we saw traces of that decades ago, right? When Deep Blue beat Kasparov and later AlphaGo beat Lucidong in AlphaGo. And now we have Framer AI, we have Midjourney, who can generate app icons better than I could ever draw. They could generate photos that look incredibly real and more stylistic than I could ever take. And we have, of course, Copilot that we have launched together with OpenAI. And I think this at least invites us to think about design in a holistic way and think of like, what should we change? What can we change? And it's incredibly early right now, so we don't really know. But I love this quote from Renoir when an impressionistic painter, right? When photography arrived, he said that photography has freed painting from a lot of really tiresome chores, starting with family portraits. And like, of course, there's going to be things that we don't want to do, but what we can do, and that's valued. But then as something comes along, it enables us to maybe do less of that and to explore something completely different. And Pablo Picasso took this even further with his style, but also with his hyperbolic and dark quote. I have discovered photography. Now I can kill myself. I have nothing else to learn, which is obviously not true, right? They both pushed art in a direction then where photography could not go. So I think we are at a similar moment right now. We're at a watershed moment, and creativity is going to look and design different before and after. And the question is, how will it look? We don't know, right? We are at the forefront, everyone in the Zoom call, of exploring exactly that, but yet we don't know because it's unexplored. But what we can do is we can think of AI and generative AI and understand how it works, and then look at some traces of how others are starting to apply it and maybe try to draw some conclusions from that. I love this visualization of AI learning. This is a perfect playthrough of Mario, not done by a human, but by a machine learning algorithm called Mar.io. Clever name. Where its goal is basically to just go as far to the right as possible. That's determined good because the goal is somewhere to the right. So it gets all of the input, which is like, where are things on the screen? It doesn't know what those are. It's not told about the concepts of the game. It just knows, here are data points, you're going to the right. And then in the beginning, when it's trying to learn, you can see in the top right, it's trying to push a lot of different buttons. And it hasn't even figured out how to press right, that it's a good thing to press right. And in a pretty early generation, it figures that out and it starts pressing right, but it does nothing else, right? But it gets it closer to the goal. So it's a good thing. And from there, right, we can quickly churn through a lot of iterations, and it can learn how to play a perfect playthrough. And similarly, like when we learn on language, what we need a way to work on training data and know what's good or not. And LLMs are often like cited as just predicting the next word in a sentence, which is correct. Like when we teach something like GPT-4 to reason, what we do is we take a sentence that we know, like if you've ever read the sentence before, you probably know that's going to end with step. A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. We base that on our experience and learnings. And in the beginning, a machine learning algorithm is not going to know that. It's going to guess, it's going to be wrong, but this is going to the right? This is the right thing to do. But then as we train it on a larger and larger window, not only being able to predict one word, but maybe a few words and more words. And as we use every single sentence that we can find basically on the internet to train it, what it does is it doesn't memorize those sentences, but generalizations, abstractions, and heuristics appear. And this is incredibly abstract, but we can clearly see this, for example, if we compare how a machine learning algorithm performs on the data that it's trained on compared to data that it's evaluated on. So training data here is red, and evaluation data here is green. And what we see is in the beginning, it sort of learns to mimic exactly the data that it sees. it has a very superficial understanding of what it's trying to solve for, and it quickly learns how to solve for that. So higher is better. But then we can see how the green line is lagging because it's not exposed to this data at all. And then when it is in its evaluation session, it performs really badly, right? But what suddenly happens here, long after being trained on and sort of mastering the training data, suddenly we see how it starts performing well at large. This is basically the moment where we start seeing generalizations, abstractions, and heuristics emerge, right? Just like we as people go throughout life, and we might, in the beginning, when we are children, we might just mimic what everyone else's say. And then our grammar is sort of perfect when we're really small, but then we start to create rules about how grammar works, and we might actually begin to perform worse. Like we start skipping irregular verbs because we figured out there are some rules that are like, well, if you add ed to a word, it's past tense. So you said goed instead of went. And this is like the phase of trying to figure out rules and abstractions. But then when we find the right ones, we start to perform better again. And the same thing happens with machine learning. So then when after that has happened, sort of, and we expose an LLM not to the prompt that it's used to, but our prompt, whatever it may be, it's associating, just coming up with ideas based on the rules and abstractions that it has learned. And similarly, we train diffusion models. We have a before and an after image. In this case, we can start with an image like a cat. Then we can add some noise to it. And then what we want to train it to do is to remove that noise, right? So we want to go back to the original image, and we know what it's supposed to be, but we just start giving it the diffused image and then ask it to remove that, right? That seems reasonable. And just like reasoning then can emerge from doing that a lot of times, in LLMs, so it can do here. So what we start doing is we add more and more noise to the original image that it tries to remove. And finally, we can start with purely noise, right? We just have noise. And we can label that noise something else. Like we can say, well, start with this noise. And what I want to appear in this image is a palm tree on a beach. And then we start running the trained model. And then for every iteration, it starts to sort of find what it thinks is there because we told it so. And then we might add some more noise so that it can remove it, but we run it over and over again. And then finally, we appear at the image that we asked for. Now, this general technique has made huge leaps in the past few months, right? So Midjourney appeared in February in 2022, so a bit more than a year ago. And you're going to see a bunch of images, exactly the same prompt for every image, right? So this is the first version. Then we saw the third version, significantly better. And then more recently, the fourth version. And now we're at the fifth version, or 5.1, to be fair. And so just in a year and a half, we went from something barely usable to incredible detail, and that's in 14 months. So currently, we can start to generate sort of all the fundamental building blocks of culture, some better than others. Text really well, images really well, video, design, code, some better than others. But we can generate everything: images, text, music, video, 3D models, and of course, code. And I think this puts our job in an interesting position. And to reflect on that, I want to start by painting up a picture of, to me, a typical design process that sort of appeared by accident, and shamelessly so, on Christmas a few years ago for me, because I was wrapping presents, as you might do, and I was using this red wax, like, to make the presents really pretty. I was working on top of grandmother's old handmade Christmas cloth. And of course, after an hour or two, mom screamed from the kitchen, and grandmother's handmade Christmas cloth was ruined, and it felt like everyone was sad and Christmas was just not a thing this year. And so in this moment, I said, like, let's experiment, which was incredibly not popular at all. But we realized after a while that like maybe we don't have any other options. So we started by Googling and doing some research. And then we shredded an old cloth and dropped a bunch of wax on smaller pieces. So we shredded an old cloth, we dropped wax on these small pieces, and then we started experimenting with different ways of removing those new stains, right? And we had some hypotheses. We didn't know if they were working or not, but we tried it, we iterated, and then we failed repeatedly, and then until we found like one way that removed that stain without any trace. And then we could just take that method, apply it to the original problem, and Christmas was saved. Now, this to me is sort of a typical design process if we do it sort of the right way, like where we start with a problem, and then we have a few different hypotheses or ways of thinking about this problem, and then we try things in this iterative fashion, right, in a circle, and then we get more data, more hypotheses, and the problem space usually even expands as we do this. We might have very different thoughts of how to do something, but then if we succeed, we can not only know that that's effective, but we'll learn from that, and that shapes our understanding of a problem space. Now, we can use AI to more effectively explore problem spaces. That's the most clear way that I've been able to think about AI, at least. Like some things will be easier to do. This is what we usually call automation, but we're not automated out of the process. We can just explore the problem spaces more effectively. Like we see this with Copilot. I think we're going to see with Framer AI right now too, how we have the ability to very quickly try out ideas, and we can try out very divergent ideas. We see it in video production too, where we can, from just raw footage, try a lot of different styles and combine different AI tools to just explore ideas faster. We saw Coca-Cola use this recently for a campaign where they're sort of traveling between different art styles, letting a Coke bottle sort of travel through history. And that's a very literal way of applying it. Like they are producing more different styles that could be more difficult to do. But I think a better way to think of it is just thinking generally about problem spaces. We can effectively, if we organize our thoughts clearly, help to explore problem spaces together with AI. And I think because of the abilities we see right now in AI, we're going to see a big increase in like culture production, including niche content, because we can personalize things and produce faster. But as every creator becomes essentially a director with endless AI experts available as augmentations of our own creative skill, we're going to see just more culture being produced. But that puts pressure on us to organize our thinking and synthesize our ideas. In the end, if we are fair to ourselves as designers or which part of the design journey we're in, not a lot of time is maybe spent in Figma or whatever tool we choose to create with. A lot of time is spent on talking about ideas, synthesizing both in our minds as we learn, but also in a company. And I think we put more pressure on that ability and that skill on individuals and on companies now that we can produce things faster and more divergently. And that's going to get trickier. Now, that's just considering AI purely from a what do we do now that we can do faster and better perspective. But it's also clear that we won't just see the same thing, but more of it. We'll see something completely new too. And machine learning stands as its own unique medium, right? It's emergent intelligence, basically woven within a network of simulated neurons that we can zip up and send to someone else on a floppy drive if they were big enough. And we need to, or we can at least design for this new medium. And when we do so, we see how a lot of concepts are just starting to change fundamentally. And we need to learn how to design in new ways, right? A photo, when we apply machine learning and ship machine learning or generative AI, is maybe no longer static, but a dynamic conceptual space where we can, rather than edit pixels, edit the very objects that we see on screen. Right? It changes what it means to ship a photo editor. In the same way, a game doesn't need to be a set of rules that we master as players, but it could be a dynamic world that we shape. And the experience of shaping it is rather more fun than mastering or completing something, right? And we saw how NVIDIA showed this just the other week, where they have generated dialogue and synthesized voice appear as you talk to it. And everything is then generated from characters, histories, personalities, and interactions, not just a script. Spotify has launched their own DJ integration, which is also powered by synthesized voice and AI recommendations, where we see how the copy then basically is no longer written for the average, but personal, relevant, and synthesized on the fly specifically for you. We have also seen, of course, how a code editor can go from being just something that makes you productive to something that produces code for you. So in this age, we can suddenly create small dynamic worlds, and we can craft not just static screens, but the opening acts of plays that play out as users use the thing that we create, right? So we set the scenery, the backstories, and the characters, and they can then be transformed and shaped in endless of ways, depending on the incentives and constraints that we set. So suddenly it's a game where we need to set dynamic constraints and incentives, right? And currently we're sort of getting used to that these can be wrong. Like generated content might be wrong, and we need those stickers every time. We often now achieve that by just anthropomorphizing or using magic wands in the UI. It's like, this is sort of magic, or this is sort of a human, and we're used to humans being fallible. So we give generative AIs names and make them human-like. But it's clear that this is the beginning of an era where the unexpected, that ability to generate things, will soon be expected. And as we sort of get used to it, it's clear that like just throwing a text input up there with a chatbot, it offers no affordances whatsoever, right? When we look at it, we don't know how to use it. And we're used to that being one of the main missions sort of a designer. Like, you should be able to look at something and quickly grasp exactly how you're supposed to use it. Like, look at a glove or a bike and you know probably how to use it, even if mastering a bike can be difficult. So I think we're early on in this journey. And if we start just adding buttons as recommendations to like, what can you do with an AI, we suddenly restrict the array of possibilities, right? And it could be that we might just have to go beyond finding the right buttons to show when in this instance, which is, I think, incredibly exciting. And especially if we think back to the quotes of Picasso and Renoir, it's like we are entering this era where a lot of things that used to be cumbersome is not, and we can explore things that no one else has explored before. And I think whatever happens in this journey, tools continue to augment our creative abilities. We are the catalysts. We are the people who synthesize, who understand the big picture, and we direct the AI in the direction that we think is appropriate. And I think Yann LeCun put this really well, professor at NYU and chief AI scientist at Meta. Many people are more capable than their boss. AI systems may become more capable than you, but you'll still be their boss. And I think, honestly, this is the best way to hire too. You want to find the best talent, so you try to hire people that are smarter than you. And then we shouldn't be afraid of finding the AI that's smarter than us as well. And in the end, I think we are going to employ them, and our everyday is not going to change that much. We're still going to be at our favorite creative stations, employing AI to express ourselves and explore problem spaces that we think are interesting, just like Julie and Janice does with their fashion trends.